Thanks, Faye. My name's Hannah, I'm a drug addict. Hello. Thanks, everyone, for organising today. I sometimes think that when you get asked to speak about, once you've been around in recovery for a little while, then you tend to get sort of certain kind of like things that you're associated by. And when you get asked to speak about a topic, then sometimes you realise that that's because you're associated by some horror show that's happened in your life. And work is clearly mine. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the horror shows that I have experienced in my working life because of my own behaviour, and try and speak in a bit more of a sort of reflective way about what I've learned and how I relate that to my learning and recovery. So I think, Jess chose a really interesting framework to think through what are the principles by applying them to each step. I'm also going to use the literature, but I'm going to look over here at these 12 traditions. If you're new in the room and you haven't had an opportunity to study the traditions yet, then, we recommend it, I think, in our sponsorship family. We've absolutely loved it, and I think got a lot from, placing kind of equal weight on the traditions as we do to the steps. And hopefully this chair will sort of demonstrate why I think that there's some really useful things in there to consider. So just having a look, maybe firstly, I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to have a look here at tradition number 5. So the purpose of these traditions is to think about how we operate as a group. So every home group and DAA is a kind of wider fellowship. How do we operate and how are we living? How are we applying spiritual principles? How are we operating? How are we working together? So this one is quite easy to sort of think about in the context of drug addiction, right? Each group, each DAA home group, has one primary purpose, and that purpose is to carry the message. So what message? The message of recovery, the message of the 12 steps, the message of the big book, to the drug addict that still suffers. Now, what if I was to transpose this into thinking about my work? What is the primary purpose of the organisation that I'm working for? What is its primary purpose? And now, how do I relate all of the actions that I take at work back to that primary purpose? For me, that is a really good way to continue to think about my spiritual behaviour at work. What is the primary purpose of the organisation that I'm working for? And am I behaving in line with that? Are my actions conducive to that primary purpose? And then some of these other traditions kind of help us to expand on that. So in one of the traditions, it talks about things that could get in the way of our primary purpose. So here in tradition 6, it says, problems of money, property, or prestige could divert me from my primary purpose. Now, again, how do I apply that to my behaviour in the workplace? Am I so concerned about how much everyone else is earning or how much money the company has that I'm actually not really thinking about what is the primary purpose of this workplace? I'm always on the hunt and think about money, right? That can be a real trap to stop me actually performing my job well. What about property? Am I too busy thinking about the resources that we have? Am I so concerned with thinking about these things that, again, I'm sort of forgetting about what the actual primary purpose of the organisation is? Am I trying to hoard things? Am I being greedy? Am I being overprotective of some of these things? And then prestige, and I've got to say this has been the real killer for me, and I didn't even realise it for a long time. Prestige, my place within the pecking order of the workplace. Workplaces are often very hierarchical in a way that, in DAA we try and introduce more flat structures. That isn't the case in the rest of the world, There is definitely a boss. The boss is not going to rotate every year. The boss is not voted in. The boss is a boss, and you've just got to deal with that. And you are not the boss a lot of the time. And sometimes you think that you could do the job better than the boss. Sometimes you think that your boss is not making very sensible decisions, and sometimes your boss speaks to you in a way that you don't really like to be spoken to. Right? So, we are not living necessarily in some sort of flat hierarchy utopia out there in the world. And so we have to be really careful about prestige. Now, what do I mean about prestige? How I think other people view me, how much power and influence I have, and how much thinking about how I can get or manipulate some of these things to my advantage could be diverting me from the primary purpose of my workplace. Right? Some of the other principles here. Tradition 1, our common welfare should come first. So am I thinking about the welfare of the group over my own my own welfare? So in my workplace, right, am I thinking about what's best for the team, not what's best for me? How can I really think about supporting everyone in the group rather than just trying to get ahead? So maybe, like, again, this links back to what Jess was saying about integrity. Maybe I don't want to be the person in the office who's like trying to elbow everyone else out of the way in order to climb the greasy pole. Maybe I want to be thinking about getting there on merit because I've been really a team player and thinking about, what is best and what is going to help our company to achieve its mission. And there's, I guess, something nice here about anonymity as well. Some of us, maybe in earlier days, or some of us still now, maybe read the Just for Today card. It's a sort of series of nice little sayings of like, things that you could introduce into your day that would help you to feel more spiritual or kind of, behave in line with what you think that God might want for you or might want for others. And one of the things within there is about sort of doing something nice and not telling anyone else about it. That seems like quite an easy win in the workplace, like, do you know what I mean? Like, boil a pot of coffee, put it out for everyone, don't say, I have made coffee for everyone, I expect something in return, right? So, these all sound, I think, kind of, quite well and good in theory, right? Yeah, I could make a pot of coffee, etc. I could maybe think about, not trying to elbow the boss out of the way quite so much or point out all of their flaws or being the office gossip, right? Now, what I love about work with my sponsor is that she's very specific about my character defects, very specific, and just at the moments in my recovery where I really think I'm going to get a round of applause for being such a good girl, clean for so long, helped thousands of people, done so much service, she finds a way to point out how actually perhaps some of the sort of thinking or behaviour that I've exhibited, is lacking in some areas and could be improved upon. So she, I think I had sort of done another step 4 or something like that, and she, kind of pointed out certain kind of patterns of behaviour. And one of them for me is self-righteousness. God, I love when I am right and I can feel a bit above other people. Moral superiority, really makes me happy. It's also a great one to practice in recovery. I'm more spiritual than you. I've done the steps more times than you. I've done more service than you. Moral superiority is like a particular sort of defect of mine, which, kind of rears its ugly head more often than I would like. And so, thinking about how my particular character defects influence how I behave at work, I think has been really important. So, to give you a sort of concrete and embarrassing example, I worked for a long time. I worked for 7 years for a charity. Charities, good things, right? Lots of moral superiority to be had there. So I worked for a charity, and our charity supported vulnerable people, more moral superiority, feeding the ego, I'm the do-gooder in the world, helping others. And the charity basically supported kids with mental health issues who were living on hospital wards. And we were a very small organisation, and our boss was of retirement age but didn't feel that he was able to retire because there was a lot of work to be done. And in a small organisation, he held a lot of skills and knowledge of the organisation. And so he wanted to make sure that the organisation was continuing on its mission. Now, somewhere along the line, basically, he came to really rely on me because I was a really diligent worker. I really cared about this job. I really valued its mission and purpose. And so, I really worked incredibly hard at this place. Now, as much as I, felt at the time that I was working really hard for the service of others, what had actually started to happen is that my ego had started to take over. And I started to really feel like a sense of, I am a good person because I do this job. I feel good about myself because I do this job. And it started to really consume like my entire ego, where I felt completely defined by this job, where I felt like everyone owed me because of how hard I worked. I started to feel superior to other people because I was such a moral, great person doing so much good work for this charity. And that behaviour would start to get really quite extreme, so it's like I'm kind of dragging myself into work when I'm clearly ill, coughing my guts up, really expecting everyone to be so grateful that I am there, but also feeling like really getting that sense that you all need me. And if I wasn't here, the whole place would fall apart. Now, I never put that to the test. Never put that to the test because it didn't serve my ego to do so, right? And actually it would be really painful for me to discover that if I didn't come in when I was ill, it'd be fine, Everyone would just get on with things. People would use their own integrity and ingenuity to somehow manage without me. Shock, horror. So, I really started to get like, what you might call martyr syndrome, basically, of like overworking incredibly long hours, making absurd sacrifices for the job, which nobody asked me to do. And really, in order to feed my own ego and to feel a sort of sense of purpose about, kind of my life. And I've got to say, in so doing, avoided a whole load of other things in life. For example, very neglectful of my relationship with my family. I have a niece and nephew who probably would have wanted to spend more time with me if I wasn't busy trying to rescue other kids, But actually, like, I missed out on quite a lot of time with, over that 7-year job of my niece and nephew who were growing up, They were like maybe 4 when I started the job, and now they're like, whatever 4 out of 7 is, 11. And so I could have been spending more time with them, and I could have been of service to other people and to other places if I wasn't putting all of my focus in this one area, for example. So, in overworking in this way, I was really sort of feeding my ego and actually, sort of, I guess, masking some other areas of life that I found more difficult, because actually I found it really easy to go in and to do my job after I'd been doing it for a really long time, to feel good about myself because I'd done it well, because I knew how to do it. I didn't feel so good about going to hang out with my nephew, who actually, sometimes with kids, when they're not yours, even if like they're your sort of family, kids are sometimes a bit boring, And it's like, it's impolite to say, but actually chatting about Game Boy for ages when you don't know what Game Boy is, It's like not that fun. I felt really uncomfortable, actually, and I avoided feeling uncomfortable because I didn't know how to interact with my niece and nephew, and I wasn't willing to put in the effort. I wasn't patient, and I wasn't exhibiting any of those characteristics. I just found it easier to avoid them, to ignore that situation, because it made me feel uncomfortable, and instead to do this other thing that I was, that was really feeding my ego and making me feel really good. So within this context where like I'm the martyr of my workplace in my mind, I run everything, I own everything, I'm really the boss, I started to get into little moments of conflict with my boss. And the conflict kind of began basically because I felt that I deserved a bigger say than he felt that I did. I feel like if I work 11 hours a day and you only work 7, I get those 4 hours more say than you do. There's like a percentage balance here. And if I'm working 11 hours a day and you're only working 7, I should get more say than you. This is something as well that we talk about in terms of the spirit of rotation in the traditions. That we really have to, some of the traditions kind of guard against some of these things, where actually we make sure that by rotating service, for example, if I'm the tea person in my home group, then I start to feel that I'm the only person that can make tea. I make tea better than everyone else, No one else can make tea. The next tea person, they're absolutely useless at their job, so I have to go in and take over, So the same sort of thing was happening to me in my workplace, So I started to feel really entitled to more of a say than the boss. Now, as you can imagine, the boss didn't really like that, He is the boss, And suddenly I'm like trying to tell everyone what they should be doing and how they should behave, because I feel entitled to do so because I work longer hours than everyone else. And that, the conflict kind of grew and grew and built and built. And then, what I thought was luckily for me at the time, I started to notice areas in which my boss was actually, practicing some dishonesty. There was actually a bit of, not good stuff happening in the company. And there I was, on my high horse. I knew I was better than all of you, and now I have evidence to prove it. You've been skimming money from the company, you've been doing something not so good, you've been hiring these people, you've been going off on holiday pretending that you're sick, whatever it was, basically. So I started to build up this like real case file. Again, kind of on the surface of things, I'm the good employee, I work really hard, helping all these vulnerable people, and all I'm doing here is exposing the corrupt boss. But really, what ended up happening basically is I was completely diverted from the primary purpose. I started to spend so long building a case file against my boss and everything that everyone else was doing wrong, that who was suffering? The people that I was employed to be working with, people who were really vulnerable and in institutions, were they getting the best out of me? No, they weren't getting the best out of me because I felt entitled, pissed off, neglected, all of these things. And actually, I wasn't able to fulfill my job in the way that I knew that I was able to. I didn't have any energy left or any empathy left in order to care for people who needed me, because I was too busy in this huge vendetta and trying to take down the boss of the company and really take it over for myself, And so, in conversations with my sponsor, that happened, many times over a long period. We had discussions, which ultimately, the one that hit home was this. Hannah, why is it always you that has to be the person that fights for social justice in situations? Why is no one else really bothered by this? Why is it always you that, thank you, that can see that there's a problem and it has to be you that sorts it out? It's always you. It's always you. When there's a problem, you're like, yes, it's me, I'm going to fix it, That is suspect, And actually, when we did a bit of digging, it really comes from my character defects. I have to be in control. I have to be in control of everything else, just like the actor. I have to be the person that sorts everything out. I have to arrange the lights, the ballet, the music, etc. And I also have to be the person who is who's in the right, the morally superior one. So in these ways, basically, I got into an absolute huge shit show at work. It was a complete nightmare. Ended up in 2 years worth of grievance procedures. I lost my job. My boss lost his job. Everyone was unhappy, and who lost out? The poor people with mental health issues locked up in institutions who wanted a charity and who wanted a service. Now, I'm not saying that's entirely the fault of my own character defects, but certainly when I reflect back on my behaviour during that job, if there was some corruption going on at work, and I no longer was able to believe in the primary purpose of my workplace being about, and that my boss's primary purpose for the company was to serve vulnerable people, and I thought that the new primary purpose was actually to serve his own interests, that's the stage at which I should have left. And there's ways basically where you don't have to be getting in the middle of things, spending years trying to figure this out, being the main detective when no one else is bothered. There's a time at which you can do a job that you think is ethical and helpful somewhere else, and you don't have to be the person left there fighting till the bitter end. So, that was kind of sort of one situation which was kind of dragged out over a really long period of time. But what I think is sort of important is, again, going back to one of the principles that you mentioned, Jess, was about humility. So apologising at work has been something that I have spent a long time negotiating with various sponsors and spiritual advisors. Because, my argument is always this. It's all well and good saying sorry to Faye in a 12-step meeting for being a bit of a dickhead, right? But going into my place of work, it's not, it's unprofessional, frankly, to go and apologise. I don't want to disclose to people that I'm an addict and they might wonder why I'm apologising. It would be weird to apologise. Work is not a culture of apology. People don't do that, I don't want to ask for a private meeting with my boss and say, actually, I'm wrong. It could undermine my bargaining power in future. Maybe they won't give me a promotion because they see me as someone, I've admitted I'm in the wrong. The workplace is not the appropriate venue, I decided, for apologies. This didn't fly with a few people that I spoke to, thanks, Sal. And I think choosing people who are not gonna, who are going to basically insist that you take a course of action that actually, you really don't want to take, I think is really important, because if I'd asked someone who was just straight up, my gossipy friend, they probably would have told me not to bother, basically, and they probably would have bought that, it's not appropriate in the workplace, blah, blah, blah. It's all well and good out in recovery, but, not so good when you're wearing suits and ties. But actually apologising, there was a couple of apologies that I made in workplace situations that were really revolutionary to my recovery and to my general sense of well-being in the world, and hopefully helped to spread a little bit of sort of goodness in the world outside of just what I benefited from. One of them was I worked for a long time for an organisation. Basically, my job was on a temporary contract, and then it came up as a permanent contract and I had to apply for it. This is really reminiscent to me of the story in the big book of the person who had to go and work for a company for a concern that he once owned. God, I felt for that person. So, I was having to apply for my own job, basically. So I wrote the application diligently, thank you very much, and was particularly resentful about it because all my friends were at Glastonbury that weekend and I was writing a job application, was not happy about that. And then I didn't get an interview. Didn't get an interview for the job that I was already doing, basically. I was furious and I decided I was going to find someone to blame. And there was this girl in my office who was on the hiring committee, and she, I decided, was going to be the main culprit for this, basically. So how did I behave? Instead of, calling a meeting with her and saying, hey, look, could you give me some feedback about my application? I really wanted this job. I wanted to, find out why it was that you felt I wasn't a good fit. We sit together every day. So, I had plenty of opportunity to do that. But instead, I just acted out my feelings through my behaviour. I was snarky in meetings. I sat like this in meetings, and every time she had an idea, then I would just turn to the group and kind of like sort of smirk as though that idea was like beyond contempt. I undermined her at every possible opportunity for maybe 2 or 3 years. I was a fucking nightmare to work with, I was a real bitch, basically. It's funny, actually, I'm sitting here in the room with someone who currently employs me, so, just so you know, I've moved on from this. But I was a fucking nightmare. And I kicked and screamed when my sponsor suggested that I apologise to this person. But when I finally did, it couldn't have been a nicer situation. This is someone who I presumed would hate me. She had every reason to hate me. I sent her a very tentative text message being like, "Hey, Jan, I really owe you an apology. I'd really like to make it face-to-face. Please, would you meet me? Would you mind? Could I come round to your house? I'll meet you round the corner from your house, please. Sorry, goodbye." And she sent me a really warm text message back, being like, "Why don't you come round for a cup of tea? This is where I live. By the way, I've just had a baby. You can come and meet my child." And she, welcomed me into her home when she had, a little baby. The baby, sat on her knee. And I basically very nervously, gave her the long list of, I was absolutely horrible in all these ways. I felt really bitter and resentful about this. And instead of just asking you questions about it, I just acted it out through my behaviour, and I probably made you feel really unhappy at work, because that would have been a really horrible environment to come into every morning for the entire day, and to live with that every week probably really fucked up your week, and I'm really sorry about that. And she was lovely, she was so nice. She apologised to me for not making more clear why they hadn't given me the job. She told me that her brother was in recovery, so she understood about the whole amends thing. It was just magical. And that resentment I carried around for ages, and that sort of whole poisoned sort of period of my life, thank you, just sort of evaporated. So those are my experiences. I hope that they are helpful to you at some point. Thanks.